very much. I'll introduce myself just as I go through, but for those of you who originally registered to come and hear me witter on in March, I apologise, I had to cancel. My excuse was a genuine one. That's what my elbow looked like about one day before I was supposed to give the talk. And really interestingly, we now use AI to interpret X-rays at Imperial. And as you can see, it spotted the fact there's a bloody great fracture in the middle of it. So hurrah for AI. It could spot that I had a fractured elbow. So anyway, I apologise that I wasn't with you then. So just by way of introduction, I'm a medical oncologist with an interest in ovarian cancer, but I also have a particular interest in early career fellowships and career development. And I've been lucky enough over the course of my career to sting some money out of various funders at various points. But most pertinently for today, I co-chair Cancer Research UK Research Careers Committee, which awards fellowships at various points in the research career spectrum, and I'm here to try and explain some of the things that we do, give you some tips from a committee as to the sort of things we're looking for, and clearly answer any questions you have at the end about fellowships in general and the CRUK process in particular. One thing is really important to understand is that the general principles of fellowship committees are the same. Doesn't matter if it's CRUK or Wellcome or UKRI. They're sort of similarly looking for similar types of things, which I'll explain. Just for the clinicians amongst you, you'll be aware that in January last year, the Oscar report came out to try and address the very obvious decline that have been in clinical academics in the UK over the last decades. And there's been a realignment, as I'll show you in a minute, of the early career fellowship offering from many of the funders so that they do align with each other. But the Oscar report highlighted that the number of academic clinicians has declined. For hospital consultants, it's gone from like 5% to 3%, and academic GPs are still incredibly rare. So one of the questions is, how do we reverse that, and how can we increase offerings for people who might be interested in a clinical academic career? On one of this very good website, the CATCH, the Clinical Academic Training and Careers Hub, has highlighted there are really 5 phases in a clinical academic career, and indeed there's 5 phases in a non-clinical academic career, and it's really important that the funders align the fellowships that they offer, starting from those who are undergraduates, PhD, postdocs, moving towards independence and then academic leadership. And I'm just going to walk you through what CRUK offers for clinicians and non-clinicians as you go through that pathway. I hope that will be of some interest to some of you. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but if you go to the CATCH website, and I will make my slides available, there's nothing on here that's confidential, I'll share them with Sian at the end. There is a realization that the different funders, be it MRC or BHF or CRUK or NIHR or the national providers like the CSO in Scotland, they need to be offering similar fellowships for people at multiple stages in their career, and an understanding that your independence, your ability to work as an independent researcher, will clearly increase linearly as you go from left to right across this. So I am going to talk about clinical and non-clinical fellowships, predominantly clinical because there's more complexity to it, but there's a lot about non-clinical fellowships as well. So Cancer Research UK, this is what they offer in independent, and actually this is not just for clinicians, it's for non-clinicians as well. For clinicians pre-PhD, we offer pre-doctoral research bursaries, which I'll talk about. For PhDs for clinicians, we offer clinical research training fellowships. For non-clinicians, there's PhD schemes through the CRUK centres. For medics, there are postdoctoral research bursaries, and then you get into the fellowships for those who have got their PhD transitioning towards independence. So for clinicians, there is the Clinician Scientist Fellowship and the new Clinical Future Leaders Fellowship. For non-clinicians, there is the Career Development Award and the Career Establishment Award. And then for non-clinicians, there's the Senior Cancer Research Fellowship, also known as the SCARF, and the Programme Foundation Award is open to all. Many of these fellowships are awarded by the CRUK Research Careers Committee. Anything with a red box around it are fellowships that we offer. Blue boxes come through clinical academic training programs, and the grey box comes from the main CRUK Discovery Science Committee. So there are various ways of attacking this, but the predominant pathway to a fellowship is by applying to the CRUK Research Careers Committee. So, as I said, there's been a great emphasis on aligning funding across funders, so they're offering similar things. So just going through that, again, these are for clinicians in the first instance. The phase 1 is the pre-doctoral bursary. And the idea of that is to provide funding to enable clinicians and indeed NMAP, so other health professionals, this is not just for doctors, to get involved in research early in their careers, with the idea that it will give you research experience and allow you to generate preliminary data for a PhD application. That PhD does not necessarily need to be with CRUK. You can apply to anybody with the data generated from one of our bursaries. We will give you up to £25,000 for running expenses. And that's definitely not for salary and not for enrolment in master's programs. It's for consumables, training of professional courses rather than master's programs, and it can last up to 1 year. It's relatively straightforward. There's a single stage written application. We do 2 per year. The next application deadline is September this year, and we'll give you a decision in December, with the idea that you would start the funding in the first half of 2027. For the clinicians, if you are a pathologist, and I'm sure many of you will know that academic pathology has been identified as an area of significant need, we've teamed up with PathSoc, the Pathological Society, to fund a pre-doctoral bursary specifically for pathologists or who are members of PathSoc. So the same idea, apart from there's £50,000 available as this bursary. And again, we offer those twice per year, single stage written application, and the next application deadline is in September. Then at the PhD stage, which we call phase 2, for clinicians, this is funding basically enable you to take time out of your training or time out of your work to undertake a PhD full time. We offer, actually it's gone up to £275,000, which includes your salary, your PhD fees and your running expenses for 3 years. Now, previously that was done in an open competition, but they're now only available through CRUK centres that have a clinical academic training programme, of which Newcastle is one. So they are available and will be advertised internally. So they're not nationally available, they're only available locally at centres with CAT-P programmes. And as I said, Newcastle is one, and you can probably imagine all the other centres around the UK that have these fellowships. So armed with your PhD, and I hope filled with a massive enthusiasm for being an academic oncology researcher, we come into early postdoctoral training. And again, I'm going to focus on clinicians for the first few minutes, because there's been a realization that for clinicians, finishing a PhD means that you're infused and you've got some research experience and some research training, but you're still not competitive for a standalone fellowship. So the postdoctoral research bursary is aimed at allowing clinicians who've got a PhD to pursue their research whilst they complete their specialist training, aimed predominantly but not exclusively at NIHR clinical lecturers. And the idea is you got to help you maintain that research activity after your PhD and to generate the experience and the data so that you will be competitive for a clinician scientist fellowship. We provide up to £40,000 for running expenses, again, not for salaries, and that can be run over 2 years if you want. Now, again, these used to be nationally awarded through an open competition, but this year CR UK have moved to making those only available through CR UK centres with clinical academic training programmes. And the idea is that single institutions or single training programmes will be able to offer people a PhD, but then offer them funding for bridging that gap to their first independent fellowship. They've also instructed, this is me now wearing my imperial hat, they've instructed institutions that they have to match the funding. So if an institution wants to get £40,000 from CR UK, they've got to stump up another £40,000 to try and double the number of people who can get this sort of funding. So I know we're in the process of advertising ours here at Imperial and ICR. I'm sure something similar will be happening in Newcastle in the next few months. But that's not a new scheme, but it's a variation on a new scheme that I hope will encourage people within centres to remain with their academic work. We then come on to the biggies, and we come on to the nationally awarded competitive fellowships. So this is phase 3. And again, for clinicians, there is the Clinician Scientist Fellowship. Now, I got my first Clinician Scientist Fellowship immediately after my PhD. There is absolutely zero chance now that immediately out of my PhD, I would be competitive for one of these. So hence why the idea is we provide that postdoctoral bridge funding through the postdoctoral bursary. But we've also realised over the years that clinician scientist fellows have become more and more and more senior. And we're now trying to bring it back to people who are potentially still in training, maybe in their last year or two of their clinical training. And so that this fellowship will be taken up maybe in the last year or two of your specialist training and bridging you through CCT until you become an independent clinician. Some people are still at the post-CCT, but you can definitely apply for these now if you're pre or peri-CCT. So the idea is that you are not at the start of this fellowship an independent researcher, but you will develop postdoctoral research experience so that by the end of the fellowship, you're ready really to be a fully independent academic. We expect people to do between 20 and 40% clinical commitments. Nearer 20 is better, but in some of the craft specialties, there is application for people to spend up to 40% because of surgical training or just getting the throughput that is required. We give you 5 years of salary, which will pay your salary 100%. Some research assistance, it could be a technician, it might be a postdoc, plus running expenses. The sort of sums of money that these fellowships award are in the region of 1.5 million. We do 2 funding calls per year, but it's a 2-stage process. You have an outline and then a full application, and I'll talk you through success rates in a minute. But again, the next application is in September for preliminary, and if you're successful there, you would go through to the March full application. So they take about a year from just applying through the 2 stages until the money is available. So you need to think quite a long time in advance for these fellowships. Then we come to phase 4, later postdoctoral, and the non-clinicians amongst you. Now, this is where you enter the picture. So this is about progressing to independence and leadership. So for the non-clinicians, we offer 2 if you like, early career fellowships. One's called career development, one's called career establishment. The only difference is the CDF, the career development fellowships, are those who do not have a tenured university position. Career establishment awards are for those who are already employed by a university or HEI or institute. Otherwise, they are identical. We give 6 years of money. It will cover your salary if you're a career development fellow or not, if you're a CEA, but it will provide research staff, running expenses and equipment. The sort of sums of money involved, if you're a CDF, again, it's about 1.5 million. If you're a CEA, it's about $1 million. And we do 2 funding calls a year, again, outline and full, a 2-step process. And again, the next deadline is September. So we have a big shortlisting meeting twice per year in which we assess all the fellowships. So it's a 2-step process for all of the big fellowships. For the clinicians, phase 4, and this is a new scheme called Clinical Future Leaders Fellowship. So we used to call them advanced clinician scientists, but again, as part of that alignment of all of the funders, we're now calling them Clinical Future Leaders Fellowships. And at this point, the expectation is that you're going to establish your independence or become a leader in your field. We don't expect people to spend much more than 20% on clinical commitments, 25, 30 maybe, but this is really, you are an absolute committed clinical academic. We expect you to have 3, and in most people, they've got 5 or 6 or 7 years of postdoctoral experience. And this time we will pay you for 7 years. We'll give you up to £2.5 million. And we pay your salary, research staff, running expenses and equipment. And the good news for you is that the host institution has to agree a tapered salary support. So CR UK pays 100% of the salary in years 1 and 2, 50% of the salary in years 3 and 4, and the institution then takes on most of the rest of it in years 5, 6 and 7. So clearly, if you're going to apply for these, you need to have agreement from your host institution. And they are not at the moment open to anybody who's got a salaried tenured post. In other words, clinical senior lecturers or associate professors are not eligible to apply. We're running our first round of these now. So we will be doing our first set of shortlisting actually next week. And then the next full outline application is in September. Phase 5. And the change has been that these senior cancer research fellowships, or SCARFs, are now only open to non-clinicians. So the clinical future leaders, we give you 7 years of funding. It used to be 5, it's now 7, and there's tapered salary support. So the SCARFs are now for non-clinicians only, and the expectation is you will already be a national leader in your field, and this is to give you money to become basically internationally leading, or indeed godlike, as you head towards your inevitable Nobel Prize. We'll give you, again, 6 years of money, £2.5 million of funding, and again, we expect the host institution to pick up the salary from year 3 onwards. These are monstrously competitive, and we very rarely award more than 1 a year, but they are for the best of the best for the non-clinicians. Everybody asks me, what is the success rate? And these are the data, these only data CR UK are giving out at the moment. So I'm afraid they're up to 2024, but things haven't changed a great deal. The 2024 data are incomplete, so that's half a year. But if you look at 21, 22, 23, 24, the numbers have not changed a great deal, in as much as the total success rate from beginning to end is somewhere between 15 and 20%. So we shortlist about 25% of the people who apply, and then we award to about half of those who are interviewed. So if you get to interview, your odds are pretty good. But the shortlisting process, I'm afraid, is fairly tough. And that's, I'm afraid, not because we're horrible people. It's because the amount of money available at CRUK is not finite. One of my tasks as co-chair is to lobby the trustees of CRUK every year to increase the amount of spending that amount of money they dedicate towards career fellowships. And had modicum of success so far, but of course salary inflation and science inflation has wiped out quite a lot of that increase. So our success rate is somewhere between 15 and 20% from start to finish. For the clinicians amongst you, another question I get is which specialties get funded. We are completely agnostic to whichever specialty. We don't care as long as you're proposing good science, but it is striking how many haematologists apply, and the haematologists are quite successful. That doesn't mean they're clever or better than you, they just apply in greater numbers. And then you can see we've got surgeons, we've got radiologists, we've got urologists, we've got pathologists, we've got pediatricians. There are general practitioners. We've even had a neurosurgeon, and we're interviewing another neurosurgeon in a few weeks' time. So there is no limit to which medical specialty can apply. As long as the project you are proposing is cancer focused, we will be interested in it. So, where to go? Well, you are here in, I'm guessing most of you are in the northeast of England, and I'm going to encourage you to think globally. All of our fellowships allow our fellows to spend time abroad, and I would encourage you, if you need to go and spend time abroad, then put it in your application. Now, it can't just be that you quite like diving, so a few weeks in Acapulco will be quite nice. It's got to be because you want to go and work in Bloggs' lab in wherever it is, Australia or New York or Canada or wherever it happens to be, and because you'll learn something unique from Bloggs' lab that you would not learn anywhere else. So if you do have a collaboration or a technique or a partnership that you need to you need to go and work abroad for a limited period of time, put it in your fellowship, because we will consider it. And actually within the fellowship we can also fund travel and relocation and flights and things separately, so that you are not disadvantaged by spending time abroad. So think globally when you're applying for fellowships. In terms of what we're looking for, I'll go through some of this in detail, but not exhaustively. But CRUK publishes what it calls its competency framework. We are a signatory to DORA, so we ignore the name or the impact factor of the journal in which you have published, and there are no time constraints. And that's a really important thing to highlight, that you can apply for a fellowship at any point, and it's not about how many years have you done, it's where are you in your career and where do you best fit into the funding that we offer. So it's about either developing independence, establishing independence, or transitioning to leadership. And that link down here, again, I will share the slides with you, has all the details of all the things that we would be expecting. But for example, if you're applying for a clinician scientist fellow, we are not expecting you to be a global international leader. And anybody who says you've got to have 6 Nature papers is talking tosh. You clearly need to have published. You need to demonstrate that you've started a project, run a project, completed a project, and published it. And that matters more than being, a middle author on 27 papers in Nature. It's about your contribution and demonstrating that this is your research. And when we say a range of outputs, we don't just mean papers. Have you got patents? Have you got IP? Have you, all sorts of things? Have you got Twitter following? All sorts of things like that count as range of outputs. But clearly publications in journals are important. but it's not the number, it's the quality of the research and your contribution to them. We would be expecting you to be starting to develop your own network, not to be fully independent, but starting to develop your own network and people starting to know who you are. Again, we're not expecting you to be headlining AACR or ASCO, but a growing awareness of you in the field. You'd have utilized some of the opportunities available to you. You will be balancing your research commitments with your clinical commitments, or indeed teaching commitments if you're working at a university, and some experience of supervision of master students or co-supervising PhD students. Again, at this stage of clinician scientist, we will expect you to develop some form of leadership skills and be able to demonstrate those, and also clearly demonstrating effective communication skills. In all our interview panels, we have lay members of the panel who are non-scientists who will ask you questions about your leadership and management and communication and engagement. And if you do apply and do get to interview, prep for those, because the questions from our non-scientific panel members can be really quite interesting and quite probing. Obviously, if you're applying for a clinician scientist fellowship or any other fellowship, you are pretty ambitious, and you should be able to articulate your career intentions and the trajectory that you wish to be on. For the clinician, the Future Leaders Fellows, and the same applies for a career development fellow and for a career establishment award for the non-clinicians, then we just expect you to have just ramped everything up. So you will have some years of postdoctoral experience. We will expect you to be demonstrating your independence or your imminent independence. So you will have a better track record than an earlier career researcher. You will have got your own independent collaborative network that is not dependent on your original boss. People will start thinking of you as an expert in the field. For example, they'll be asking you to peer review grants and papers, and clearly you will have wider dissemination, and people will starting to translate your research, for example, to clinical trials or technology, etc. Again, by the time you get to this Future Leaders Fellows or career development, you'll really have a clear idea of your research ambitions. What is your own research niche that doesn't overlap with your previous boss? You are autonomous. You'll be getting grants from other funders for PhD students or indeed postdocs. And clearly you can articulate a clear plan for translation of your research. You get the idea for this pathway towards independence. For the last few minutes, I just want to talk about what we as a panel look for. And I call this the 4 Ps. So person, project, place, and pounds. And I'll explain what I mean by those. The first and most important thing that any fellowship panel look for is the person. And my mantra when I'm chairing these panels is we fund people. So we're looking for bright, talented, clearly motivated, energized people who can articulate their research plan and their research ambitions. So clearly we fit people to the competency framework. We look at the track record. Remember, it's not just how many papers, but it's what has your role in that paper been and what is the quality of that research? What is your trajectory? That's a really important one. And we're quite good at spotting people who are on the appropriate trajectory. We're looking for originality and independent thought and evidence of leadership that's appropriate to the stage of your career, and evidence of communication and engagement, not only communicating science to a scientific audience, but clearly PPIE work, communicating, engaging with patients and the public is fantastically important. Obviously, a very good person can propose an absolutely rubbish project, so the project's got to be good. And one thing we're looking for is actually, what is the hypothesis? What are you actually going to do? And you'd be surprised how some people don't always articulate that very clearly. So there needs to be a clearly articulated hypothesis, aims, and project plan. A pitfall that many clever, ambitious early career researchers fall into is trying to do too much. They're trying to boil the ocean and cure all cancer in one move. So is this feasible to be done by, for example, one clinician scientist with the support that we're offering? And the usual answer is not that it's under ambitious, that it's over ambitious, and you're just not going to succeed. For CRUK, clearly the fellowship project has to address a key cancer question, and it has really ideally to have clinical relevance. If people are using primary patient samples, we really want to know if they are available. If you say, I want 500 colon cancers and I've found 20 so far, and I'm sure I'll find a few more, that makes us worry. If you say, I'm going to analyze 500 samples from a clinical trial that's finished recruiting and I've already got the samples in my fridge, that makes us much happier. Because clearly clinical trials are great, but you want to be addressing the science questions when you know you've got both the samples and preferably the data. The third P is place. And the question is this the right place for this fellow to do this research? We will fund people to do work wherever if we think the environment is the right place. So we want to know who's going to be supervising you or advising you. How supportive are the institutional letters? Do not underestimate the importance of institutional letters. We read them very carefully. We had one fellow a few years ago who was applying to work at a rather famous university, and the department head's letter was mainly about how brilliant the head of department was and didn't mention the fellow at all, which was a complete clanger. So the letters matter, and make sure that they are you get them in time and that they are worded appropriately. Is there a culture of that institution of supporting fellows? That matters. It doesn't mean that you can't be the first fellow there, but obviously being in an environment where fellows are nurtured is really important. And we want to know how the fellow is going to be supported. Will you have the space and access to equipment and samples that you need? Is the institution offering you anything else, like a PhD student or whatever? For the clinicians, what is the clinical expectation? As I said, 20% is what we aim for, maybe a little bit more for craft specialties. And has the host NHS Trust agreed? A letter of support from the clinical director is very important, saying we will welcome this fellow and they will do one clinic and one MDT and one, whatever it is. That's really important. Finally, the final P is pounds, by which I mean money. But clearly CRUK are very generous, but they have limits to their finances. And we just want to know what is being requested. You need to articulate clearly what the money will be spent on. Is it reasonable? We will fund open access fees for publishing, but we probably won't give you £50,000 for that. Similarly, if you're doing animal costs, are animal experiments required? Are the numbers satisfactory? Get your sample size calculators out. Are the animal costs justified? And if you're wanting to do informatics and are wanting to, pay for informatics, is informatics support available to do the analyses you want to do? So again, if you're planning one of these, think about the money relatively early on, because it requires a bit of thought. Finally, before I finish, a word on mentors. So mentorship is incredibly important, and it's something I take very seriously and we as a committee take seriously. Evidence that you and or the host institution have identified a named or a certainly nominated mentor. Your mentor is not your boss. Your mentor is somebody who is outside your immediate line management and who is therefore impartial with no agenda and has no conflict. Preferably or definitely external to your line management, preferably external to your department or even your institution. But it's somebody whose advice you trust. I often think it works best when you choose your own mentor rather than being kind of given one. But even within institutions, they often have mentoring programs. And I would strongly recommend you find a mentor now and certainly have a plan for a mentor at the time you apply for your fellowship. And at that, I will say thank you very much. I hope that was helpful, and I will be very happy to answer any questions you might